Chloe Sterling adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse, the fabric whispering against her gold bracelet. She leaned forward, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur meant to convey both intimacy and authority to her lawyer, Arthur Vance. "Let's be perfectly clear, Arthur," she said, her tone lacquered with the casual disdain she had perfected over a decade of marriage. "Liam has nothing. Absolutely nothing." Arthur, a man whose tailored suits cost more than the car Liam drove, nodded slowly, his pen poised over a pristine legal pad. He had seen this 100 times. The powerful, wealthy spouse ready to discard the less ambitious partner. "Nothing?" he echoed, a single word inviting elaboration. "Nothing that's his, I mean," Chloe clarified, a dismissive wave of her hand encompassing the entirety of her husband's existence. "He has his little consulting business. It pays for his hobbies, I suppose. The mortgage, the cars, the club memberships, this house. That's all from my family, from my father. Liam is a passenger. A comfortable one, I'll admit, but a passenger nonetheless." She sat back, the leather of the chair sighing in protest. The narrative was simple, clean. She was the heiress. He was the charity case she had mistaken for a partner. The divorce would be a simple amputation. Her husband, Liam Sterling, was a man who moved through the world with a quiet economy of motion. He was of average height, with a calm, observant face that most people found pleasant but forgettable. He wore simple, well-made clothes that never drew attention. For the 12 years of their marriage, he had described his work as being a specialized logistics consultant. Chloe had translated this in her mind to something mundane, like optimizing shipping routes for a mid-level retail company. It sounded dreadfully, respectably boring. It allowed her to frame him as the stable, simple man who grounded her, a narrative that had been useful in her 20s, but had become a social liability in her late 30s. What Chloe didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was the scale of that little consulting business. She saw a man who worked from a home office and occasionally flew to unremarkable cities for site visits. She did not see the encrypted servers in their basement, the secure satellite links, or the global network of assets he commanded. Liam Sterling wasn't a logistics consultant. He was the founder, owner, and chief architect of Sterling Dynamics, the most advanced and discreet private defense contractor on the planet. His company didn't optimize shipping routes. It moved entire armies, deployed covert assets, and managed supply chains for operations that never appeared on the news. His clients weren't retail companies. They were governments and global security councils. And his net worth wasn't a modest six-figure salary. It was an estimated $49 billion. Within 3 months, the woman who claimed he had nothing would discover he owned everything, including the very foundations of the world she believed was hers. But for now, in this sterile, sunlit office, she was supremely confident. She saw the path ahead as a simple formality. Her father, the formidable Richard Davenport, CEO of Davenport Industries, would back her play. His lawyers would crush Liam's inevitable, pathetic resistance. She would keep the house, the investments, the life she deserved. Liam would be given a pittance, a generous severance for his years of quiet companionship, and he would disappear back into the beige obscurity from which she had plucked him. She smiled at Arthur, a final, confident seal on her declaration. "So, draw up the papers. Offer him something small, something that makes us look gracious. 10,000. He can use it for a deposit on a sad little apartment somewhere. He should be grateful." Arthur Vance made a note. He saw no reason to doubt her. The Davenports were old money, powerful and ruthless. Liam Sterling was a nobody. The math seemed simple. But even a man as jaded as Arthur felt a faint, unidentifiable tremor of unease. There was something in the way Chloe spoke of her husband, not with anger, but with a profound, almost geological level of underestimation. It was the kind of certainty that so often preceded a cataclysm. Hey everyone, thank you for joining me for another story. I see we have people tuning in from all over. Texas, the Philippines, London, Ontario. It's amazing to have you all here. What you just heard is the beginning of a storm, the quiet moment before the world changes for a woman who thinks she has it all figured out. If you love stories about hidden strength and seeing arrogance meet its match, you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. And hit that like button to let me know you're ready for the truth to come out. Now, let's get back to the story and see just how wrong Chloe Sterling really is. The first crack in Chloe's pristine world appeared not in a lawyer's office, but at her father's dinner table. The Davenport estate was a monument to generational wealth, a sprawling Tudor mansion where the air itself seemed filtered through money. Dinner parties there were not social gatherings, they were performances. Richard Davenport presided over them like a king holding court, his pronouncements on business and politics echoing off the high baronial ceilings. Tonight's guest of honor was Marcus Thorne, a real estate developer with teeth as white as his yacht and a portfolio of flashy, high-risk condominium projects. He was everything Liam was not: loud, ostentatiously dressed, and dripping with a manufactured charm that Chloe found intoxicating. For months, her friendship with Marcus had been escalating, an open secret that Liam had chosen to observe with a painful, unnerving silence. Liam sat at the far end of the table, a deliberate placement by Richard that rendered him more of an observer than a participant. He nursed a glass of water, his gaze steady as he watched his wife laugh a little too loudly at one of Marcus's jokes. The topic, as it always did, turned to business. "The market is ripe for a man with vision," Marcus declared, gesturing with a hand that wore a watch worth more than Liam's car. "The old ways of doing things, the legacy industries, they're dinosaurs, slow, complacent." He glanced pointedly down the table toward Liam. Richard, ever the provocateur, picked up the cue. "Liam here is in logistics," he announced, the word logistics carrying an audible sneer. "Isn't that right, son? Moving boxes from one place to another?" The table offered a polite, condescending titter. Liam didn't react. He simply met his father-in-law's gaze. "Something like that, Richard," he said, his voice even. "It's about ensuring the right assets are in the right place at the right time. Efficiency, reliability, it's more complex than it sounds." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Chloe interjected, a bright false smile plastered on her face. She was performing for Marcus, for her father, for everyone. She was positioning Liam as a quaint relic from her past. "Liam is wonderfully methodical. He once spent a week creating a spreadsheet to organize our pantry." More laughter. This time it was less polite. It was openly mocking. Liam felt the familiar sting, a dull ache he had learned to compartmentalize. He saw the scene not as a participant, but as a strategist. He saw the alliances, the power plays, the casual cruelty wielded as a social tool. He looked at Chloe, at the woman he had once loved for her vibrant, fiery spirit, a spirit now curdled into a brittle obsession with status. He had seen this coming. He had watched her drift away from him, drawn into her father's orbit of cynical materialism. He had tried. He had suggested they move, start fresh somewhere else, away from her father's suffocating influence. He had tried to share parts of his world with her, speaking in hypotheticals about complex systems and global challenges. Her eyes would glaze over. She wasn't interested in complex systems. She was interested in country club invitations and mentions in society columns. Later in the evening, as coffee was being served, Richard clapped Marcus on the back. "Marcus is closing a deal on the old waterfront district. $1 billion project. That's vision." He then turned to Liam. "Tell me, Liam, what's the biggest deal you've ever consulted on? A few $100,000? A new warehouse for some paper company?" Before Liam could answer, Chloe cut in smoothly, saving him from the perceived embarrassment. "Oh, Dad, don't put him on the spot. Liam's work is very specialized. It's not about flashy numbers." She placed a hand on Marcus's arm. Tell me more about the waterfront, Marcus. The designs look absolutely breathtaking. Liam was erased from the conversation. He became a ghost at the table. He stood up quietly, his chair making no sound on the thick Persian rug. "If you'll excuse me," he murmured to no one in particular. He walked out of the dining room, through the grand marble hallway, and onto the stone terrace overlooking the manicured gardens. The cool night air was a relief. He pulled his phone from his pocket. It was a simple, unassuming device, but its internals were a fortress of custom encryption. He tapped the screen, bringing up a secure messaging app. A message was waiting for him from a top deputy, a former general named Elias Vance, no relation to Arthur. Phase 2 of Project Chimera is greenlit, awaiting your final authorization for asset deployment. Liam looked back through the large bay window at the scene inside. He saw his wife, radiant and animated, hanging on the words of a man who represented everything shallow and transient. He saw her father, smug and powerful in his gilded cage. They were celebrating a billion-dollar condominium project. They thought it was the pinnacle of human achievement. He typed his reply: "Authorized deployment, full scale. Monitor satellite feeds for confirmation. I want real-time updates on all movements." He was setting in motion a logistics operation valued at over $12 billion, involving the strategic repositioning of naval assets across 3 continents. It was a move that would subtly shift the balance of global power in a volatile region. It was, as he had told Richard, about ensuring the right assets were in the right place at the right time. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and took a deep breath. He felt a profound sense of loneliness, a chasm between his world and the one Chloe chose to inhabit. For years, he had maintained the separation to protect her, to give them a shot at a normal life. His work was dangerous, stressful, and carried burdens he never wanted her to bear. But his silence, his humility, had been misinterpreted as weakness. His simplicity had been mistaken for a lack of substance. They had laughed at him for organizing a pantry with a spreadsheet. They had no idea that the same methodical mind, the same attention to detail, was currently choreographing a ballet of ships, planes, and personnel across the globe. The humiliation stung, yes, but beneath it, a cold, hard clarity was beginning to form. The game had to change. He could no longer afford to be a ghost in his own life. The charity gala a few weeks later was the stage for the next act of his public erasure. The event was a glittering affair held in a museum, where dinosaur skeletons were draped in fairy lights, and the city's elite mingled under the watchful gaze of ancient history. Chloe was a supernova in a crimson dress, her laughter echoing in the vast, vaulted space. Liam, in a classic tuxedo, was a black hole beside her, absorbing light and attention, his presence a quiet counterpoint to her dazzling display. He stood by her side, a silent consort, as she greeted a circle of her friends. Marcus Thorne was there, of course, a magnetic pole around which Chloe and her circle now orbitated. "Chloe, darling, you look divine," said a woman named Beatrice, whose face was a testament to the art of surgical preservation. "And you brought Liam. How lovely." The way she said his name, stretching the vowels, infusing it with a gentle pity, made it sound like an accessory she was surprised Chloe had remembered to wear. "Of course," Chloe said, her hand resting lightly on Liam's arm, a gesture that felt more like ownership than affection. Marcus leaned in, his voice a low rumble meant only for Chloe, but loud enough for Liam to hear. "Still playing the part of the devoted wife? You're a better actress than I thought." Chloe's answering smile was tight. "It's a transitional period." The conversation flowed around Liam. They talked of Aspen, of summering in the Hamptons, of art auctions and corporate takeovers. It was a language of wealth and status, a dialect in which Liam was fluent but chose not to speak. His silence was taken not as a choice, but as an inability to participate. A man Richard Davenport's age, a banking executive named Peterson, turned to Liam with an air of forced politeness. Richard tells me you're in logistics, Sterling. Davenport Industries uses a massive logistics network. You ever work with a company of that scale? Liam was about to give his standard, vague reply when Marcus cut in with a chuckle. I don't think Liam's in that league, Peterson. His is more of a boutique operation, right, Chloe? A one-man show. Something like that, Chloe agreed, her eyes fixed on Marcus. The casual betrayal was a clean, sharp wound. She was actively diminishing him now, siding with his rival to solidify her own social standing. Liam felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he got in a crisis room when conflicting data streams were pouring in. He didn't feel anger. He felt a sense of focus. He was observing variables, calculating outcomes. He saw the contempt in Marcus's eyes, the desperate social climbing in Chloe's, the dismissive arrogance of her father's friends. They were all pieces on a board, and they had no idea what game they were playing. He excused himself, murmuring something about getting his wife a drink. He walked away from the circle of glittering sharks, melting into the crowd. He found a quiet alcove behind a towering Tyrannosaurus Rex fossil. He took out his phone. There was another message waiting. This one was from his chief of finance. Davenport Industries has submitted their quarterly invoice. It includes the standard 15% markup Richard negotiated last year. Given the current situation, do I approve it? Davenport Industries was one of Sterling Dynamics' hundreds of subcontractors. They manufactured specialized container housing for field operations. It was a lucrative contract, the single largest and most stable source of revenue for Richard's company, accounting for nearly 40% of their annual profit. Richard believed the contract was with a shadowy, quasi-governmental entity known only as Aegis Consolidated, a shell corporation Liam had set up years ago to handle domestic procurement. Richard had no idea he was working for his son-in-law. The 15% markup was something Richard had boasted about for a year, proof of his brilliant negotiating skills. In reality, Liam had granted it as a gift, a silent subsidy to his wife's family. Liam stood in the shadow of the dinosaur, the sound of the party a distant murmur. He thought about the conversation he had just endured. He thought about Chloe's hand on Marcus's arm. He thought about being called a one-man show. He typed his reply. Reject the invoice. Send a notification that all contracts are under review, pending a performance audit, and initiate a quiet inquiry into Marcus Thorne's financials. All of them. I want to know who backs his billion-dollar vision. He hit send. The action was silent, invisible. But in that moment, he had fired a torpedo into the hull of Richard Davenport's company and aimed another at Marcus Thorne's ostentatious yacht. They would not feel the impact for days, perhaps weeks. They would continue to laugh and drink their champagne, secure in their world. But the water was already rushing in. He turned and walked back toward the party. As he approached the group, he saw Chloe reach up and straighten Marcus's bow tie. It was an intimate, familiar gesture, a wife's gesture, and it was not for him. He picked up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. He walked back to the group and handed one to Chloe. Their fingers brushed. Her skin was cold. Thank you, darling, she said, her voice a perfect performance of wifely gratitude. He looked her directly in the eye. For the first time in a long time, he let her see a flicker of the steel beneath his calm exterior. You're welcome, Chloe, he said, his voice quiet but carrying a new resonance. I just want to make sure everyone has what they deserve. She held his gaze for a second, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She felt something different in him, a change in pressure, like the air before a storm. But then Marcus whispered something in her ear, and she laughed, turning away. The moment was forgotten. The warning had been issued, but it had not been received. To the world, Sterling Dynamics didn't exist. There was no gleaming skyscraper with a name on it, no flashy website, no press releases. Its headquarters was a sprawling, anonymous campus in the Virginia foothills, hidden behind a perimeter of old-growth forest and state-of-the-art security. It was designated on maps as the Mid-Atlantic Research and Development Center, a deliberately bland name that invited no curiosity. Inside, it was a different universe. This was Liam's true home, the world he had built from nothing. The main operations center was a cavernous, subterranean space known as the Arbiter. Three-story screens displayed a global tapestry of weather patterns, shipping lanes, flight paths, and encrypted data streams. The room was filled with the quiet hum of immense processing power and the low murmur of analysts speaking in a dozen different languages. It was less an office and more the nerve center of a living, global organism. When Liam walked into the Arbiter, the atmosphere shifted. The quiet murmurs ceased, replaced by a palpable wave of respect. Here he was not Chloe's forgettable husband. He was Mr. Sterling, the visionary who had revolutionized modern logistics. He had designed the predictive algorithms that could forecast a supply chain disruption from a minor political tremor halfway across the world. He had built the secure network that could operate invisibly within the world's public infrastructure. He strode past desks where analysts monitored everything from satellite deployments to the movement of a single, high-value asset in a hostile city. His deputy, Elias Vance, a man with a face like carved granite and 3 decades of military command experience, met him by the central command console. "Sir," Elias said, his voice a gravelly baritone, "Project Chimera is fully deployed. The assets are in position. Not a single flag was raised. It was a clean execution." "Good," Liam said, his eyes scanning the glowing world map. "What about the Davenport audit?" Elias's expression soured slightly. "Our team found what you expected. Inferior materials, cut corners on safety protocols, billing for premium components and using standard grade. Richard's 15% markup wasn't just negotiation, it was fraud. He's been bleeding us from the inside, assuming we'd never check the fine print." Liam felt a familiar weariness. He had given Richard that contract as a gesture of goodwill, a way to support his family without them ever knowing. He had trusted him. And Richard, in his arrogance, had seen it as an opportunity to exploit a faceless client. "And Thorne?" Liam asked, his voice hardening. "Marcus Thorne is a house of cards," Elias reported, swiping a hand to bring up a complex financial chart on a side screen. "His billion-dollar vision is leveraged to the hilt. He's got 3 major backers, all of them overextended. The lead investor is a private equity fund based out of Singapore. If that fund pulls out, Thorne's entire empire collapses in a week." Liam stared at the intricate web of debt and speculation that propped up the man his wife admired. Marcus wasn't a visionary. He was a gambler playing with other people's money. "Who controls the Singapore fund?" Liam asked. Elias allowed himself a small, grim smile. "A holding company, which is owned by another holding company. But if you trace it back 5 layers, the majority shareholder is a small investment firm called Orion Capital. And Orion Capital, sir, is one of ours. We acquired it 3 years ago as part of a strategic diversification." Liam stood silent for a long moment, the implications settling. He owned the man who was trying to steal his wife. He had the power to bankrupt Marcus Thorne with a single phone call. The irony was so profound it was almost nauseating. He had built an empire so vast, so powerful, and so secret that his enemies were unwittingly his own employees and debtors. He looked at the main screen, at the silent ballet of ships and satellites moving at his command. This was his world, a world of consequence, precision, and immense responsibility. And he would go home tonight to a house where he was considered a failure, a simple man incapable of understanding the high-stakes game of condominium development. "Elias," he said, his voice low and firm, "put a hold on the Davenport contract termination. Don't cancel it yet. Just let the invoice rejection stand. Let Richard sweat. And as for Mr. Thorne, I want you to prepare a margin call on his entire line of credit. Don't execute it, just have it ready. A single file ready to deploy on my command." Consider it done, sir, Elias said. He knew better than to ask why. He had worked with Liam long enough to know that his actions were always deliberate, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Liam spent the next hour reviewing progress on a new project, a clean water distribution network for sub-Saharan Africa. It was a philanthropic endeavor, a logistics challenge he was tackling for no other reason than because he could. He traced the planned routes on a holographic map, his mind absorbed in the complex dance of filtration plants, transport drones, and local distribution nodes. This was what he did. He built systems. Some were for defense, some were for profit, and some were to save lives. He left the campus as the sun was setting, trading the world of global strategy for the quiet streets of his suburban neighborhood. He pulled into the driveway of the beautiful home he had paid for in cash, a fact his wife was blissfully unaware of. He walked inside, and the smell of expensive perfume hit him. Chloe was getting ready to go out. Again. She swept into the foyer, resplendent in a cocktail dress. She didn't look at him. She was checking her reflection in the hall mirror. "I'm going out with some friends," she announced. "Don't wait up." "Chloe," he said, his voice stopping her as she reached for the door. She turned, annoyed. "What, Liam?" "We need to talk." "I don't have time for a talk right now," she sighed, her impatience palpable. "Whatever it is, it can wait." "I don't think it can," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I received a letter from your lawyer today." Chloe's expression hardened. The pretense of civility dropped away, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "So it started. Good. Then let me make it simple for you, Liam. I've already spoken to Arthur. The house is mine. The investments are mine. They came from my family's money." "Is that what you believe?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's what I know," she snapped. "I'm offering you a way to walk away from this with your dignity. Take the settlement. Disappear. If you try to fight me, I will have my father's lawyers bury you. They will drag your name through the mud, audit your sad little company into oblivion, and leave you with less than nothing. Is that clear?" He stood there, in the marble foyer of the home he owned, being threatened with financial ruin by a woman who had no idea she was a minnow threatening a whale. He looked at her, at the beautiful, furious stranger she had become. The love he had once felt was now a hollow echo, replaced by a deep, profound sorrow. But beneath the sorrow, the strategist in him was making a final calculation. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for action had come. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Crystal clear, Chloe." Her face relaxed into a triumphant smirk. She had mistaken his calm for surrender. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." She turned and walked out the door, leaving him alone in the silent house. He stood there for a full minute, listening to the sound of her sports car roaring to life and fading into the distance. Then he walked into his home office. He sat down at his desk and looked at a framed photo from their wedding day. 2 happy, hopeful people who had no idea what the future held. With a heavy heart, he picked up his secure phone. He sent a single, 2-word message to Elias Vance. "Execute all." The house felt cavernous in the days that followed. Chloe had moved into the guest suite, creating a cold war of shared hallways and silent meals. She radiated an aura of triumphant certainty, confident that Liam was coming to terms with his impending defeat. She interpreted his quietness as despair, his methodical packing of personal items as a sign of his resignation. He was folding, just as she and her father had predicted. The first sign that her world was tilting on its axis was a frantic call from her father. "Chloe, have you spoken to Liam?" Richard's voice was tight with an anxiety she had never heard before. "Barely. Why?" she asked, distracted as she browsed an online catalog for new furniture for her soon-to-be single life. "The Aegis invoice was rejected," he said, the words tumbling out. "Not just rejected, it was flagged. They've initiated a full performance audit on our entire contract history. My contacts have gone silent. No one's returning my calls. It's like we've been blacklisted." Chloe frowned. "Aegis? That's your big military contract, right? It's probably just a bureaucratic snag. You're Richard Davenport. You'll sort it out." She was entirely unconcerned. It was a problem in her father's world, distant and abstract. "You don't understand," he hissed. "This contract is 40% of our revenue. If we lose it, the company is in serious jeopardy. The stock has already dipped 3 points on rumors alone. I need you to talk to Liam. Find out what he knows. His field is logistics. Maybe he's heard something, knows someone we can talk to." The irony was staggering. Her father, the titan of industry, was asking her to appeal to her simple husband for help with a problem Liam himself had created. "Dad, Liam manages shipping manifests for shoeboxes. I hardly think he has clearance to know about your top-secret government contracts." "Just ask him," Richard snapped, and the line went dead. That evening, she found Liam in his study, carefully placing books into a box. He moved with the same unhurried precision she had once found calming and now found infuriating. "My father called," she began, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "He's having some trouble with a client. Aegis Consolidated. Ever heard of them?" Liam looked up from his book. His face was placid, unreadable. "I've heard the name. They're a major player, very discreet." "Well, they've cut my father off. He seems to think you might have some insight." The very idea was laughable to her, and she didn't hide it. "Why would I?" Liam asked, placing another book in the box. "He seems to think all you logistics guys know each other," she said with a dismissive shrug. "Look, it doesn't matter. He's just panicking." She changed the subject, her tone becoming sharp and accusatory. "What I want to know is when you're going to have your lawyer respond to Arthur. My offer is more than generous, and I'm not waiting forever." "I don't have a lawyer," Liam said calmly. Chloe stared at him, baffled. "What do you mean you don't have a lawyer? Are you that naive?" "Liam, they will destroy you without representation." "I don't think I'll need one," he said. He closed the lid on the box and labeled it "Philosophy" in neat block letters. "I've requested a final meeting to discuss the settlement in person. My assistant sent the request to Arthur's office this afternoon." A wave of relief washed over Chloe. This was it, the surrender. "A meeting? Good. Where? Arthur's office?" "No," Liam said, his gaze meeting hers. There was an unnerving stillness in his eyes. "I've requested the main boardroom at Davenport Industries headquarters. Friday, 10 a.m. Just you, me, your father, and your lawyer." Chloe was taken aback. The audacity of it. He wanted to meet on their turf, in the very heart of her father's empire. She saw it as a pathetic attempt to feel important, a final, foolish gesture before capitulating. He wanted to be in the room where power happened, just once. "Fine," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. "If you want to be formally executed in my father's boardroom, I won't object. It's fitting, in a way." She walked away, feeling a surge of power. The end was in sight. She was so close to having everything she wanted. The call from a sobbing, hysterical Beatrice came 2 days later. "He's ruined, Chloe. Marcus is ruined." "What are you talking about?" Chloe asked, sitting up straight. "His investors, they did a margin call, all of them, at once. They're seizing his assets, the yachts, the cars, the condo projects. It's all gone. He's been wiped out overnight. He said someone deliberately targeted him, a coordinated attack." Chloe felt a chill crawl up her spine. A coordinated attack. A performance audit. Things were happening that felt too big, too coincidental. For the first time, a seed of genuine doubt began to sprout in the bedrock of her certainty. She thought of Liam's quiet composure, his unnerving calm. She thought of his words at the gala. "I just want to make sure everyone has what they deserve." She found him on the back patio, looking out at the setting sun. He was holding a worn leather portfolio, an object she'd seen him with 1,000 times, but never paid any mind. "Marcus Thorne has been ruined," she said, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't a question. Liam didn't turn. He continued to watch the sky. "I heard. My father's company is on the brink of collapse." "I heard that too." She took a step closer, her heart hammering in her chest. A terrible, impossible suspicion was forming in her mind. This is all happening at once. It's not a coincidence, is it?" Liam finally turned to face her. His expression was not triumphant, not angry. It was weary, filled with a profound sadness. "No, Chloe," he said softly. "It's not a coincidence." The world seemed to tilt. The foundations of her reality began to crack. She looked at the man she had called her husband for 12 years, the man she had dismissed as simple, weak, and insignificant. And for the first time, she saw him as a stranger with secrets she couldn't begin to fathom. The meeting on Friday was no longer a formality, it was a reckoning, and she was walking into it completely blind. The morning of the meeting was gray and overcast, the sky the color of slate. It matched the mood inside the car as Chloe and her father were driven to the Davenport Industries headquarters. Richard had aged a decade in a week. His face was pale, his usual blustering confidence replaced by a brittle, nervous energy. "This is a disaster," he muttered, staring out at the rain-streaked streets. 40 years. I built this company for 40 years, and it could all be gone because of some faceless bureaucrat at Aegis. "It will be fine, Dad," Chloe said, though her own confidence was a hollow shell. "We'll deal with Liam, then we'll focus on this Aegis problem. Arthur says Liam has no legal standing. He's coming to beg." Richard just shook his head, unconvinced. The boardroom at Davenport Industries was on the top floor, a cathedral of corporate power. A single, immense mahogany table stretched across the room, surrounded by 20 chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a view that on any other day filled Richard with a sense of ownership. Today, it just made him feel like he had farther to fall. They took their seats at the head of the table, flanking their lawyer, Arthur Vance. Arthur spread his files out, a neat fortress of paper. They were ready. They were in control. At precisely 10 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. Liam walked in. He was alone. He wore a simple, dark gray suit that fit him perfectly. He carried no briefcase, no files, just the same worn leather portfolio Chloe had seen him with the night before. He looked calm, centered, and completely out of place in this arena of sharks. "Liam," Richard said, his voice attempting a tone of authority that fell flat. "Glad you could make it. Let's get this over with." Liam walked to the opposite end of the long table and took a seat, placing the portfolio on the gleaming wood in front of him. The distance between them was vast, symbolic. "Richard, Chloe, Arthur." He nodded to each of them, his voice even and measured. Arthur Vance cleared his throat and launched into his prepared speech. "Mr. Sterling, we are here today to finalize the terms of your divorce from my client. As you know, Mrs. Sterling comes from significant family wealth. The assets acquired during the marriage were, by and large, a product of that wealth and her father's generosity. Therefore, our position is—" Liam held up a hand. The gesture was not dramatic, but it had an immediate, silencing effect. Arthur stopped, his mouth slightly open. "Thank you, Arthur," Liam said. "I'm familiar with your position. But before we discuss the terms you proposed, I think it's important to establish a baseline of truth. We've been operating under a number of misapprehensions." Chloe scoffed. "Misapprehensions? Liam, this is pathetic. Just take the offer." Liam's eyes locked onto hers. The sadness was gone, replaced by an unbreakable, diamond-hard resolve. "For 12 years I have been silent," he began, his voice low but filling the cavernous room. "I was silent out of love, and then out of habit. I allowed you and your father to construct a narrative about me that was convenient for you. The simple man, the charity case, the man who wasn't in your league. Today, that silence ends. He looked at Richard. On May 12th, 3 years ago, at your anniversary dinner, you joked to your friends that my contribution to the family was keeping the garden tidy. You did it in front of me, as if I weren't there. He turned his gaze back to Chloe. On September 8th last year at the charity gala, you told Marcus Thorne that marrying me was a mistake and that I was simple. You thought I couldn't hear you. I did. He continued, his voice never rising, but each word landing like a carefully placed stone. At a dinner party 6 weeks ago, you mocked me for organizing a pantry, while your father dismissed my entire career as moving boxes. All while you were openly encouraging the advances of a man who, at that very moment, was deeply in my debt. Chloe's face went white. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Arthur Vance looked back and forth between them, his legal instincts telling him that the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "This is pointless," Richard blustered, his voice too loud. "What does this litany of petty grievances have to do with anything? We're here to talk about assets." "That is exactly what we are here to talk about," Liam said. "The value of assets. And you have profoundly misvalued every asset in your life." He rested his hand on the leather portfolio. "You believe this house, this company, your entire lifestyle is the product of Davenport family wealth. You are mistaken." He opened the portfolio. He didn't pull out bank statements or stock certificates. He slid a single, deceptively simple document across the polished table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Richard. It was a contract termination notice. Richard picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. He read the header. "Aegis Consolidated," he whispered, then looked up at Liam, his face a mask of confusion. "What is this? How did you get this?" "Aegis Consolidated is a shell company, Richard," Liam said, his voice turning cold. "A legal fiction I created to handle domestic procurement without attracting attention. The kind of attention that gets your family targeted. The kind of attention I have spent my entire career avoiding." The pieces began to click into place in Richard's mind, forming a picture so monstrous, so impossible, that his brain refused to accept it. You're with Aegis?" "No, Richard," Liam said, the finality in his voice like a judge's gavel. "I am Aegis. Aegis, Orion Capital, and a dozen other entities you've never heard of are all subsidiaries of my company. The little consulting business you and your daughter found so amusing." He paused, letting the weight of the moment land. "The name of my company is Sterling Dynamics." The name meant nothing to Chloe, but she saw the effect it had on her father. All the blood drained from Richard Davenport's face. He looked as if he had been physically struck. He knew that name. Every CEO in the defense and technology sectors knew that name. It was a legend, a ghost. A company rumored to have more power than most nations, run by a reclusive, anonymous genius known only as Sterling. "No," Richard breathed, shaking his head in denial. "That's not possible. Sterling Dynamics, they're a global entity. They're valued at—" His voice trailed off as he did the impossible math. $49 billion as of the last fiscal quarter, Liam supplied calmly. "The contract you have with Aegis, the one that accounts for 40% of your company's revenue, is less than 1% of my annual operating budget. I granted it to you as a gift, Richard, a way to ensure my wife's family was secure, and in return, you defrauded me, and you encouraged your daughter to treat me with contempt." Chloe's world had ceased to make sense. The numbers were astronomical, unreal. 49 billion. Liam? Her Liam? The quiet, unassuming man she was trying to discard for $10,000? Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the man who fixed the leaky faucet with the invisible titan who apparently controlled her father's destiny. "It's a lie," she stammered, looking desperately at her father for confirmation. "Dad, he's lying. It's some kind of pathetic bluff." But her father wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Liam with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He knew it was the truth. It was the only explanation. The sudden audit, the stonewalling, the collapse of Marcus Thorne, it was all the coordinated action of an immense, unseen power. The power of the man he had called son and treated like a servant. As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened again. A man in his late 60s, with the erect posture of a lifelong military officer and 4 stars gleaming on the shoulder of his immaculate uniform, stepped inside. He was followed by 2 aides in crisp dress blues. Richard Davenport gasped. It was General Harding, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A man Richard had spent years trying to get a 5-minute meeting with. General Harding ignored everyone else in the room. His eyes went straight to Liam. He strode down the length of the table and offered his hand. "Liam," he said, his voice resonating with authority and genuine respect. "Sorry to interrupt. Your office said I could find you here. We have an urgent situation developing in the South China Sea. I need your eyes on it." Liam stood and shook the general's hand. "Of course, Robert. Give me 10 minutes. I'm just concluding a private matter." "Take all the time you need," the general said. He then turned his gaze, cold as a winter sea, upon Richard Davenport. "Davenport," he said, the name an indictment. "I've read the preliminary audit of your work for Sterling Dynamics. You're lucky you're not facing a federal indictment for fraud against a critical defense contractor." The general's eyes swept over Chloe and Arthur Vance, dismissing them as irrelevant. He then looked back at Liam. "We'll be waiting in the anteroom." With a crisp nod, he and his aides departed, closing the doors behind them and leaving a silence in the room that was heavier and more profound than any sound. The validation was absolute. The bluff, if there ever was one, had been called and revealed to be the devastating truth. Liam was not just rich. He was powerful on a scale that made her father's wealth look like pocket change. He didn't just move boxes. He moved armies. He didn't consult with mid-level managers. He advised generals and governments. Chloe finally looked at her husband, really looked at him. The quietness she had mistaken for weakness was a deep, contained strength. The simplicity she had mistaken for a lack of ambition was the focus of a man who operated on a plane she couldn't even perceive. The world had not been what she thought it was, not even close. Her entire life, her identity as a Davenport heiress, her belief in her own superiority, it was all a fragile illusion. An illusion that Liam had quietly paid for. Arthur Vance, the high-priced lawyer, looked like he had seen a ghost. His pen had fallen from his hand. All his legal strategies, his threats, his confident maneuvering had been based on a single, fundamentally flawed premise: that Chloe held all the cards. He now realized they weren't even playing the same game. He slowly, carefully, began to pack his files away. There would be no negotiations today. Chloe's mind, which had been racing, came to a sudden, sickening halt. The implications crashed down on her not in a wave, but as a single, monolithic block of ice. The house wasn't hers. The cars weren't hers. The money she lived on wasn't even her father's. Not really. It was a subsidy, a rounding error in Liam's galactic finances. She had tried to kick a man out of his own house, offering him a pittance of his own money as a parting gift. The humiliation of it, the sheer, staggering arrogance of her actions, burned in her throat like acid. I don't understand," she whispered, the words catching. It was all she could manage. Liam looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of the old sadness returned to his eyes. "No," he said, his voice softer now. "You don't. You never tried to." Richard, however, understood all too well. He was a businessman, and he was staring into the abyss of total ruin. He lurched to his feet, his face a ghastly shade of pale. "Liam, son, wait," he stammered, his voice cracking. The condescending patriarch was gone. replaced by a desperate, pleading man. "We can fix this. The audit, it's a misunderstanding. A few overzealous middle managers. I'll fire them. I'll personally oversee the contract. We can renegotiate the terms. Please, don't do this." "This isn't about the contract, Richard," Liam said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It was never about the money. This is about a pattern of behavior, a fundamental lack of respect. You took my generosity for weakness. You took my silence for stupidity. You built your sense of superiority on a foundation of ignorance, and you taught your daughter to do the same." He turned his attention back to Chloe. Her face was a canvas of shock and dawning horror. The confident, icy woman from the lawyer's office was gone, replaced by a frightened, bewildered stranger. "You wanted a divorce, Chloe," Liam continued, his voice resonating with the quiet authority of absolute power. "You will have it. A clean break. You will sign the papers I have prepared. You will make no claims. You will not contest it in any way." "The house," she whispered, the word barely audible. "The house is a Sterling Dynamics asset, purchased for the security and comfort of its CEO. You will vacate it by the end of the month," he stated, not cruelly, but as a simple fact. "The cars are leased by the company. They will be returned. The club memberships are in my name. They will be canceled." He was systematically dismantling her entire world with quiet, precise sentences. Each word was a brick being pulled from the foundation of her life. "You'll have nothing," she breathed, echoing her own words from Arthur's office. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "Not nothing," Liam corrected her. "Your father's company, what's left of it after the stock collapses tomorrow morning, when the news of the canceled Aegis contract becomes public, will be yours to manage. You will have the Davenport name. You will have precisely what you had when I met you, minus the illusion of grandeur." He paused. "I am not a monster, Chloe. I have set up a trust. It will provide you with a modest but livable income, enough for a small apartment, a sensible car, and a life without luxury. It is more than you are willing to offer me." The reversal was total, absolute. The woman who had planned to leave her husband with $10,000 was now being granted a lifeline by him. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tectonic event. Chloe finally broke. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound of a world breaking. "Liam, please," she cried, the tears now streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. If I had known—" "If you had known," Liam interrupted, his voice cutting through her pleas, "you would have behaved differently. And that is the entire problem. Your respect is conditional. It's for sale. You would have treated me well, not because of who I am as a man, but because of what I have. You would have loved my bank account, not me. And I have spent 12 years wondering if you ever loved me at all, or if you just loved the comfortable, simple life I provided, a life that allowed you to feel superior." He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the three of them: the defeated lawyer, the ruined titan, the broken wife. "The greatest asset I ever had was my integrity, my choice to live a quiet life, to be a good husband, to treat people with respect regardless of their station. And all three of you tried to take that from me. You mistook my kindness for a flaw." He picked up his leather portfolio. "The meeting is over. You will hear from my legal team. They are not as patient as I am." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. As his hand touched the handle, Chloe cried out his name, a desperate, final plea. He stopped, his back still to her. "I'm sorry," she wept. "Liam, I am so, so sorry." He stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching. Then, without turning around, he spoke, his voice filled with the weight of 12 wasted years. "I know, Chloe. The tragedy is, I believe you are." Then he opened the door and walked out, leaving them in the ruins of the world they had built. 6 months later, the dust had settled, revealing a landscape irrevocably altered. The name Davenport, once a symbol of industrial might in the city, was now a whisper associated with hubris in collapse. Davenport Industries, stripped of its most vital contract and exposed for its fraudulent practices, had been carved up and sold for parts. Richard Davenport, publicly disgraced, had been forced into a bitter, isolated retirement in a modest condo in Florida, far from the halls of power he once commanded. Chloe lived in a small, tastefully furnished two-bedroom apartment downtown. The trust Liam had established for her provided enough for a comfortable, if unglamorous, existence. The society columns no longer mentioned her name. Her fair-weather friends, who had orbited her wealth and status, had vanished like morning mist. She had taken a job at an art gallery, a position she had secured on her own merit, using a long-forgotten art history degree. She was different. The brittle arrogance was gone, eroded by humility. The casual cruelty had been replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness. For the first time in her life, she was living without the safety net of her father's name or her husband's hidden empire. She was just Chloe, and she was slowly discovering who that person was. One afternoon, a package arrived for her. It was a small, flat box with no return address. Inside, she found a single, framed photograph. It was from their honeymoon in Italy, a candid shot someone had taken of her and Liam, sitting at a small cafe, laughing. They looked young, happy, and utterly in love. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a small, handwritten note. It was not from Liam. It was from Elias Vance, his deputy. The note read, "He wanted you to have this, to remember that it wasn't all a lie." Chloe held the photo to her chest. The tears that came this time were not of shock or loss, but of a deep, aching regret for the happiness she had so carelessly thrown away. She finally understood. The issue had never been about money or power. It had been about value. She had valued the wrong things. She had worshipped the superficial and dismissed the profound. She had been given a king and traded him for a jester because the jester wore a shinier hat. Meanwhile, Liam Sterling stood on a dusty plateau in East Africa. The sun was hot on his face. Below him, a massive state-of-the-art water purification and distribution center, powered by a solar farm that stretched for a mile, was nearing completion. It was the flagship of his new philanthropic endeavor, the Sterling Foundation, which he was now running personally. Drones buzzed in the air, mapping the final pipeline routes that would bring clean water to 3 million people. He had traded the world of covert defense for the world of overt humanitarianism. The skills were the same: logistics, strategy, meticulous execution, but the goal was different. He was no longer just protecting nations, he was building futures. Elias Vance stood beside him, shielding his eyes from the sun. "It's magnificent, Liam," he said, "truly." Liam nodded, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "It's a start, Elias, a good start." He was no longer hiding. His face was on the Foundation's website, his name attached to its projects. The world now knew who Liam Sterling was, not as a shadowy billionaire, but as a man using his immense resources to solve impossible problems. He had lost a wife, but he had found a new purpose, a purpose that was more fulfilling than any defense contract. His personal life was quiet. He lived in a minimalist but beautiful home overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a place designed for peace and reflection, not for social performance. He had learned a hard lesson about love and trust, a lesson that had cost him 12 years of his life. But he was not bitter. He was a strategist, and he knew that even a failed campaign offered valuable intelligence for the future. He had learned that true strength doesn't need to be announced, but true respect must be earned on both sides of any relationship. He had learned that some people can change and some can't, but that you can't build your life waiting for them to choose. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the African plain, he thought of Chloe one last time. He hoped she would find her way. He hoped she would build a life based on real value, on kindness and integrity. Her betrayal had been a crucible, and while it had burned away their marriage, it had also forged him into the man he was now. Free, purposeful, and at peace. He had won the war, but he knew, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that in the end, they had both lost something irreplaceable. The victory was not in his enemy's defeat, but in his own survival and rebirth. He had, in the truest sense of the word, found his own value. And so, the story of Liam and Chloe comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that a person's worth is not in their bank account, their job title, or the company they keep. True worth lies in character, in integrity, and in the respect we show to others, especially to those we claim to love. It's a lesson that Chloe had to learn in the hardest way possible, and a truth that Liam held on to even when it was being tested. I want to ask you all, have you ever felt underestimated in your life? Have you ever had to quietly hold on to your own sense of self-worth when others were trying to diminish it? Let me know your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. Until then, remember to value the quiet strength in others and in yourself. Be well.